Drum loaders became popular in the 1930s with weapons like the Thompson submachine gun. Initially, they were a good action to increase sustained fire and slightly attack the low power of the pistol ammunition used by the submachine guns of that time. But why don't the world's armies use or usually use drum loaders if they are supposed to be better? They have double the capacity, reducing the frequency of reloads. If we look at the weapon that popularized the drum magazine, the Thompson submachine gun, since it went on sale, it had a 50-round drum magazine available, and later the 100-round drum magazines came out which were quite heavy. But in World War II, the Americans realized how inconvenient the drum magazines were and quickly replaced them with straight box magazines of 20 and 30 rounds. The Soviets had the same problem with the Pistolet-Pulemyot 41. The Pistolet-Pulemyot 41 Opasha, or as the Russians called it, had a 71-round drum magazine. Later, when they brought out the Pistolet-Pulemyot Sudayeva 43, they replaced the drum magazine with a curved box one of 35 rounds. A similar case was seen with weapons like the RPK. The Soviet RPK had available drum magazines of 75 bullets and curved magazines of 40 bullets. The drum magazines were used by the AKMs because the soldiers popularly used the RPK's magazines in their AKMs because they could, but they only did it at the beginning, as later the soldiers stopped using the drum magazines both in the AKMs and the RPKs. Since the release of the AK-74 and consequently the AK-74 also came out, the RPK-74 also came out. The RPK-74 came only with Orboste 45 double-row rounds magazines, completely discarding the concept of drum magazines. But why did both the Americans and the Soviets discard the drum magazines and stop using them? Well, here's the answer. Drum magazines have many disadvantages. First, we have a greater difficulty when it comes to loading them. Drum magazines are loaded in the same way as box magazines, but the two axes where the ammunition rests in the case of drum magazines are circular. Therefore, to load them, it is done in the traditional way, inserting one bullet after another, while in box magazines you can use clips and load the magazines much faster. Another reason against drum magazines is that they are very difficult to carry. Drum magazines have a larger volume than the ammunition they carry. Their shape also makes them difficult to carry. Transporting multiple drums feels like hauling a substantial amount of ammunition, but is misleading. And those who have been soldiers or are soldiers know that one less kilogram in your equipment makes a difference, and carrying something heavy comfortably makes it feel lighter. The curved box ones are small. Almost all the volume of the charger is filled with ammunition, and its shape helps a lot to store and carry it. Another problem with drum magazines is that they unbalance the weapon. Before the Second World War, this was not a problem, either because that was not an aspect to consider when making a weapon, or at least it was not so determinant. But with the advances in armament development that occurred after the Second World War, designers paid a lot of attention to the balance of the weapon. Usually a weapon is designed with one or a couple of predetermined magazines. Now imagine what happens if you have a weapon that was designed to carry 30-round magazines and then you put a 75-round magazine in it. The weapon will feel unbalanced and uncomfortable. The Soviets tried to solve this problem by tilting the RPK's magazines slightly forward, however the problem still persisted slightly. Another disadvantage is the cost of drum magazines. Drum magazines are much more expensive and difficult to produce, while curved box magazines only have a spring that pushes the ammunition up, and that's it. Drum ones have a rotary push system similar to a sprinkler. It is much more complex and expensive to produce. Considering the complexity of one and the other, obviously the drum magazine is less reliable because it is susceptible to dirt, and it takes longer to disassemble a drum magazine than a curved one. An interesting fact about drum magazines is that when the Soviets created drum magazines for the RPK, they tried to improve it by giving more stability and accuracy to the AKM by placing a drum magazine under the barrel of each AKM. This increased the weight of the weapon by about 2 kilograms, but made the weapon much more stable and significantly reduced the recoil. But in the end, they decided not to standardize that measure because the center of gravity became quite heavy. uncomfortable, and the weapon in general with a second magazine became quite cumbersome. But returning to the topic, another disadvantage is what happens if you lose a magazine. It's not a problem if you lose one from the box because it's only 30 rounds and that's it. But if you lose a drum, you lose 75 rounds, you probably run out of ammunition. Having heard all these cons of drum magazines and considering the only advantage they give is reducing the frequency of reloading, it may give you an idea of why the world's major armies discarded the idea of drum magazines and why it is in disuse, at least in the military and police field, because drum magazines are widely used in the civilian market. There are quite ingenious solutions that have been made to increase the amount of ammunition without unbalancing the weapon, and of course counteracting all the disadvantages of drum magazines. We have the helical magazine of the PP-19, Bison or the horizontal magazine of the E-90. They are certainly very clever solutions. There are problems with low ammunition,